I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the 73rd meeting of the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, and pursuant to Standing Order 108, Bracket 2, we're continuing our briefing on the issue of asylum seekers who are irregularly entering into Canada from the United States. We welcome both Minister Hussein and Minister Goodale to continue in our briefing. We've heard from officials in both your departments and as well as one agency, and we're delighted you're here. And because it's Mr. Goodale's birthday, it's not every day you turn 39. We'll begin with Mr. Goodale for his opening remarks, and then Mr. Hussein.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. That's a wonderful present. Delighted to be here. Good to see you again in a new capacity from where I remember you last as the chair of a committee, which is the Public Safety Committee. But thank you. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm very glad to have the opportunity with Minister Hussein to discuss the issue of irregular migration. Je remercie le comité et ses membres.
I would like to thank the committee and its members for its exhaustive review of this very important national file. Canada is an open, welcoming, and generous country, but it is also a country based on the state of law, and the government of Canada takes very seriously our laws and the integrity of our borders.
In the circumstances of this year, appear to have been misled to believe that crossing the border into Canada in an irregular fashion is somehow a free ticket to Canada, and it certainly is not. We have been making that point repeatedly in Parliament, in the media, in the public domain, and in the United States since the surge of asylum seekers began earlier this year. We want people to know that crossing the border into Canada between designated ports of entry is contrary to the law. We also want to warn people about how dangerous that can be. And that's why there are rigorous immigration and customs rules that must be followed. And to be clear, we enforce those rules through CBSA, the RCMP, the IRCC, and other agencies to protect our border and to safeguard our communities, while we also respect all of Canada's international obligations, including those that are reflected in Section 133 of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Anyone seeking entry to Canada must demonstrate they meet the requirements to enter and/or to stay here. That's a matter of fact and proof and evidence. This is not negotiable, and it applies regardless of where or how someone tries to enter the country. Those entering Canada outside of ports of entry are subject to particular scrutiny. They are arrested by the RCMP or by a local law enforcement officer under the terms of the Customs Act. The RCMP then conducts a preliminary risk assessment to determine if the person has been involved in illegal activity or presents any safety or security risk. This assessment involves detailed questioning, searches, the examination of documents, and so forth. It may result in the person remaining in RCMP custody for further investigation if that is deemed necessary, or they may be transferred to another police agency if that is the appropriate course, or they will be brought to a CBSA officer, Canada Border Services Agency officer, at a port of entry, or to an inland CBSA or IRCC office. Once they have cleared that preliminary police and security check at the moment of irregular crossing, asylum seekers then face a careful process to determine whether or not they are admissible and eligible to make a claim according to Canadian and international law. There are no shortcuts, no exceptions, and no special treatment. There are also no guarantees that an asylum seeker will be able to stay in Canada. That is up to the IRB to determine. Not all asylum claims will be accepted, and not everyone is eligible even to make an asylum claim. The rules are very clearly specified in the IRPA, the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Verifying an asylum claimant's identity is obviously fundamental and essential, and it's done for all cases each and every time using both biographic and biometric information. This screening includes an interview, taking fingerprints and photographs, as well as medical, security, and criminal record checks. The process is intended to ensure that anyone who wants to come to Canada has not committed serious crimes and does not pose a health or safety risk to Canadians. An asylum seeker's records are examined for any immigration or criminal or national security concerns, and they are checked against Canadian, international, and other databases, including Interpol. No one leaves the port of entry without this initial security screening having been completed in a very professional manner, in the first instance by the RCMP and then by CBSA. If there is doubt, they can and will be detained. If the applicant is eligible, the person's file will be referred to the Immigration and Refugee Board for appropriate consideration. The person will be authorized to be in Canada to attend a hearing of the IRB, where each claim is decided on a case-by-case basis. If the IRB determines that they are not in need of Canada's protection, and bear in mind that's the nature of the claim that's being made by an asylum seeker, that they are seeking asylum in Canada because they need Canada's protection for their life or their safety. If it's determined that they do not need Canada's protection, then they are removed from Canada. Under the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, removal orders must be enforced as quickly as possible. The Canada Border Services Agency is firmly committed to doing so, and sometimes you will note that they get some flack for that, but that is their duty under the law to effect those removals as quickly as possible. Many people have been working very hard to ensure that the process that I've described is managed effectively, efficiently, and in as orderly a fashion as possible. That includes reallocating resources to where they are most required within the RCMP, within CBSA, and within IRCC. Responding to the increase in asylum seekers this year has been very much a whole of government effort. Numerous departments, besides the two or three that are abundantly obvious, numerous departments are involved in the coordinated response, and that is all organized and coordinated through the Government Operations Center in my Department of Public Safety. The leadership shown by all of the agencies has permitted an efficient and effective response to a very fluid situation. Enhanced processing capacity at Lacolle and inland offices in Montreal and Cornwall has significantly reduced the backlog of people waiting initial processing and eligibility determination. In some cases, we are able to conduct both the initial interview and investigation and the secondary stage eligibility interview at Lacolle, and that reduces pressures down the road. As members of the committee will know, an ad hoc intergovernmental task force on irregular migration, of which Minister Hussein and I are members, was recently created, involving not just the federal agencies, but also a number of provincial agencies, to work on issues related to the influx of asylum seekers entering Canada from the United States, and the collaboration at that level has been very good. The task force has met 4 times so far, most recently a week ago today. Mr. Chair, Canadian authorities are diligent in protecting the integrity of our border and the safety of our country while applying our rules and procedures to provide refuge for those in need of our protection according to Canadian and international law. The government will continue to address irregular migration in accordance with that law and in keeping with our values as an open and welcoming country. I thank you for your interest, and happy now to turn the floor to Minister Hussein.
Thank you very much.
Minister Hussein.
Thank you very much, Minister Goodell. Mr. Chair, first of all, happy birthday. I think it's not yours? Okay, I thought it was yours. Someone told me it was your birthday. Mr. Chair, it's a pleasure to appear once again before this committee. Monsieur le Président, je suis heureux de me...
Mr. Chairman, I'm very pleased to appear before the committee once more.
Committee members may have on this important and timely topic. Je serai heureux d'Europe.
And I'll be pleased to answer any questions you may have on this important and timely topic. First, I will make a few comments.
From officials in my department over the past 2 meetings, and they've described to you some of the actions we've taken to address the recent increase of asylum seekers crossing into Canada from the United States outside designated ports of entry. I'd like to follow up on these comments by stressing that Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada has been working very closely in partnership with other departments and agencies and with other levels of government to ensure that we have the capacity to deal with the situation and process claimants expeditiously while maintaining the overall integrity of the asylum system. I'll also note that while asylum seekers await decisions, the social assistance supports they receive are funded and provided to them by our provincial partners. But as we take these actions, we remain strongly committed to orderly migration and to first and foremost ensuring the safety of Canadians. Mr. Chair, Canadians can be assured that we've been monitoring this situation for many months and putting in place the necessary plans. And although it's far from a routine situation that we're facing, it's one that we've been able to manage responsibly, effectively, and professionally. And I'd like to take an opportunity to thank my department officials and officials in all the different agencies involved for how they've been able to rise to the challenge and respond with the utmost professionalism, nimbleness, speed, and ingenuity. I'll now outline the concrete ways in which we've responded. When we saw the numbers of irregular migrants begin to increase at the Lacolle border crossing, we were able to quickly mobilize in order to reassign staff and set up additional office space so that we could keep up with the volume and process asylum seekers quickly in terms of their eligibility hearings. In fact, these efforts have enabled us to bring down the eligibility processing timelines from 5 to 7 months down to 5 to 7 days. We figured out a way to fast-track work permit applications from asylum claimants across Canada in order to alleviate the pressure on social assistance budgets of provincial governments. This is an issue that was raised by the government of Quebec, and we moved quickly to establish a new 30-day service standard for work permit applications so that asylum seekers may support themselves and become self-sufficient while they await their final decision on their claims. And this minimizes, again, the impact that they have on provincial social assistance programs. Similarly, we have built in flexibility to ensure that asylum seekers were covered under the interim federal health program immediately after background checks were completed, but while they were awaiting their initial hearing. This was important because we wanted to ensure that public health is protected, that asylum seekers have access to basic care, and that there is no undue burden on hospital emergency rooms and provincial healthcare budgets. Mr. Chair, all of these are great examples of how we have been responding to an uncommon situation in an effective manner. At the same time, we've been working to dispel the false information that has prompted many to embark on a journey to cross our border. We know this situation is in part fueled by misinformation on various social media outlets and other channels suggesting that certain groups of individuals will receive preferential treatment or given status in Canada. This is, of course, incorrect. And all claimants have been and will continue to be treated according to existing laws. We've taken a number of steps to dispel false information and inform people in Canada and the United States of the facts regarding the asylum process in Canada. In recent weeks, 2 of our colleagues, multilingual members of Parliament, traveled to the United States to help counteract this false information among different diaspora communities. They met with local politicians, community leaders, and made appearances in the local media and multicultural media, as well as in Canadian and broader U.S. media. As well, I had the opportunity to hold a very fruitful roundtable discussion on this very issue with groups in the United States, in New York, groups that serve immigrant communities and actually take in phone calls whereby people call them to ask them about the asylum system in Canada. This roundtable included the largest immigrant service provider in New York City and New York State, the New York City Mayor's, as well as the New York City Mayor's office, and the legal services provider for immigrants. And these groups will now be able to provide and pass on the correct information to the thousands of individuals that they deal with on a monthly and weekly basis. One of the things that's become clearer through these meetings is that many different groups of people in the United States are receiving false information about the Canadian asylum process. We are coordinating outreach approaches targeting each and every of these communities through our U.S. missions and consulates. At the same time, we're conducting outreach to stakeholders right here in Canada. This is through targeted emails to key stakeholder organizations, video and audio messages available on the IRCC website, media outreach, and social media. All of these materials are being translated into the languages used by diaspora communities that we're trying to reach. We've also begun monitoring Spanish language media in the United States and have distributed our outreach products to those media. Efforts are also underway to gather information from those who are already here to determine where they came from and what sources of information that they relied on in order to make that journey to Canada. So, Mr. Chair, we are ramping up our outreach efforts and our intelligence gathering to remain on top of this situation. I look forward to continued collaboration with our key partners, including provinces and territories, and contingency planning to handle any future fluctuations. And in fact, in the middle of this process, whenever the provinces were bringing to us any pressure points, we were able to work with them and collaborate to coordinate solutions on those issues. Canadians should be confident that our officials continue to manage this uncommon situation in a professional and effective manner. And I want to thank you very much, and I look forward to answering all your questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, both ministers. Amazingly disciplined in your time. I would have expected that from Mr. Hussein. I'm surprised at Mr. Goodale. My previous experience. We're now turning to the Liberals for the first round of questions. Mr. Ananda Sangari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and ministers and the panel. Welcome to the committee, and thank you for your presentations. Mr. Hussein, you had mentioned that the whole intake at Lacal has been managed responsibly, effectively, and professionally, and I think it's fair to say that's been a very consistent message we've heard from other stakeholders. I do want to ask you specifically with respect to the Safe Third Country Agreement. Can you elaborate on it and the need to have it intact and some of the importance of ensuring that there's orderly entrance to Canada and the importance of it with respect to our relations with the U.S.?
Absolutely. So the Safe Third Country Agreement is an agreement between Canada and the United States, and the agreement is essentially based on a principle, and this principle is supported by the United Nations Refugee Agency, which says that an asylum seeker should not engage in asylum shopping. They should claim asylum in the first safe country that they land in. So in essence, if an asylum seeker lands in Canada, they shouldn't claim asylum in the United States. And the opposite is also true. If they first land in the United States, they shouldn't claim asylum in Canada. So based on that principle, Canada and the United States entered into this agreement in 2004. And what the agreement says is that we will enforce that principle. At the time that the agreement was negotiated, the agreement was basically supposed to cover official ports of entry where Canadian and American officials can see the asylum seeker and present themselves. And so the agreement, as it was entered into, covers that situation where people which would present themselves at a port of entry and claim asylum. And that agreement continues to be in place. And when, for example, an asylum seeker comes from the United States and presents themselves at a Canadian port of entry, the Safe Third Country Agreement applies, and they're told to go back to the United States to claim asylum there. There are exceptions to the Safe Third Country Agreement. For example, if you have a blood relative or if you are an unaccompanied minor, then you can still make a claim in Canada. But essentially, in a broad principle, if you present yourself at a Canadian or an American port of entry from either Canada or the United States, you're supposed to claim asylum in the country that you came from.
Mr. Goodale, I think you had outlined the screening that takes place with respect to health and criminality and admissibility. Can you specify as to any major trends or any major concerns, if any, that's come about with respect to the number of claimants that you've processed so far?
I'd ask the officials from CBSA who have actually, and the RCMP, who have the actual on-the-job experience in this, but my impression, looking at the reports that have come in over the last 7 or 8 months, is that the volume of problems that have to be dealt with at the border, apart from the challenge of volume from time to time, but the actual degree of difficulty with the cases is relatively small overall, and that the experience has not been one of significant risk to health or safety or the public. When issues, in the very few cases where they are identified, where those issues present themselves, obviously, because the management right on the scene is a combination of RCMP and CBSA, with a lot of cooperation from other law enforcement authorities, they are able to deal with any particular cases immediately and effectively to ensure that there is no exposed risk to Canadians. Mr. Cloutier, would you have something further to add?
Thank you, Minister. I think that's absolutely right. Generally speaking, Mr. Chair, we are dealing with situations on site immediately as they present, and they do not present on a regular basis. It is overall, in our estimation, even less than 1% of cases that are cases dealing with serious criminality and which are resolved at the time in their entirety.
Mr. Antisangri, one thing that is clear in the IRPA, that issue alone, serious criminality, renders a person ineligible to actually make a claim for asylum. So it's a very effective screen.
And to both ministers, and keeping in mind very limited time, you had mentioned, Prime Minister, we are dealing with an issue of due process, so ensuring that those who come in, whether it's an admissibility issue or whether it's an actual claim, get due process and are treated fairly. Are you confident that the mechanisms are in place and the timelines are in place and the resources are in place for that to take place, both at the admissibility stage as well as in the processing stage?
I have seen absolutely no evidence to the contrary. In fact, from time to time, NGOs and the UN High Commission for Refugees is monitoring this situation. And their reports in terms of how CBSA, the RCMP, IRCC have conducted themselves have been consistently very positive.
Thank you.
I would say that we've been able to manage the situation at IRCC by redeploying staff and rededicating resources, but we've done that in a way that has been we've done that with the resources that we have. So it's been a question of being a little bit more efficient, finding innovative ways to deal with this, but also essentially redeploying staff to pressure points and massively beefing up the Montreal IRCC office to do eligibility hearings there, as well as having a mobile team at that time at the NAV Center in Cornwall to make sure that we were able to do that.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Mr. Nandasangri. Ms. Rampel.
I'd also like to extend my birthday wishes to the Minister. It would probably be uncouth of me to mention that he's a few years older than my father. But nonetheless, I'm kidding. In all seriousness, I think all of us here, regardless of political stripe, would agree that ensuring rigorous controls of Canada's border helps to instill confidence in the immigration system, and I think also helps to prevent the rise of nationalist rhetoric, as we've seen south of the border. So my questions are going to be in that context. We heard this week that the IRB is at a 40,000 case backlog, which is incredible. So obviously we need to have any means possible to ensure that the spirit of the Safe Third Country Agreement is being pursued. It's been noted that when the Safe Third Country Agreement was negotiated in 2002, there were several loopholes that were allowed. And, frankly, they're being used today to thwart the spirit of the agreement by people who are entering Canada illegally from the U.S. and then making asylum claims. A previous colleague of mine, who was the immigration minister, stated that he repeatedly asked the Obama administration to amend the Safe Third Country Agreement to remove the loopholes. Yes, he also has stated that they completely refused to consider any changes. Yesterday, I noted that he speculated that this was because the U.S. government regards it as being in their interest that a certain number of illegal aliens self-deport themselves to Canada so that the U.S. doesn't have to worry about tracking, detaining, or deporting them. I'm not asking you to comment on that, but I'm wondering if the government has broached the topic of amending the Safe Third Country Agreement to cover claims made by people entering Canada through unofficial points of entry with the new American administration, especially as we A, renegotiate NAFTA, and B, I think it could be argued that it would be hypocritical for the Americans to ask Canada to improve border security if they are not willing to reciprocate. Or is the government content to allow the new administration a convenient option to encourage people to self-deport to our country with a minimum amount of American resources involved?
I'd like to just begin by saying that we in no way encourage irregular migration. If your question is about Canada becoming sort of like a second option for people who have exhausted their options or feel that they've exhausted their options.
Just to clarify, my comment is whether or not the government has broached with the Americans the renegotiation of the Safe Third Country Agreement.
We haven't done that
Thank you.
At the moment.
My next question is on related to the IRCC document entitled Ministerial Opinions on Danger to the Public Nature and Severity of the Acts Committed and Danger to Security of Canada. It outlines how the minister can exercise authority to deem someone who is seeking asylum protection or has already received the same in the event that they can commit an egregious act against the safety of Canadians and designate them a public risk and subsequently order their removal from Canada. Per this document, I request that you and your officials table with the committee the number of times since November 2015 that the CBSA has advised clients that the CBSA will seek the minister's opinions on the basis of paragraph 115.2a and paragraph 115.2b or combined of IRPA, as well as how many removal orders have been issued subsequent to reviewing these opinions, as well as the number of outstanding deportations associated with the removal orders.
We're happy to table that document with this committee.
My question is then subsequently related to the information sharing agreements and processes related to that process and other processes between hearing asylum claims and ensuring the safety of Canada. The current law stipulates that institutions can share information if it's relevant to the recipient's institution's jurisdictions or responsibilities under an act of Parliament or another lawful authority in respect of activities that undermine the quote, the security of Canada, including the respect of their detection, identification, analysis, prevention, investigation, or disruption. My understanding is that if Bill C-59 comes into force, the Government of Canada institutions will only be permitted to share information that contributes to the recipient's institution's carrying out of his responsibilities. Has an analysis been done on how Bill C-59 will affect the minister's abilities to carry out the responsibilities outlined in ENF 28?
All of the implications of existing and proposed future legislation have been very carefully analyzed.
Could you table that analysis with the committee?
Well, I'll ask the department to.
And specifically, I'm asking for the analysis on how Bill C-59 will affect the carrying out of duties in ENF 28. Will that be tabled with committee?
I will examine what's available and get back to the committee, Mr. Chair,
I will remind you that you do have an obligation under Bosch and O'Brien to provide the committee with information requested here.
I will do my very best to respond fulsomely, as I always do.
Happy birthday, and I'll turn that over to Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, thanks to my colleague. The CBSA target stated that 80% of the failed asylum seekers would be out of Canada within 1 year. And the departmental performance report, though, shows that 53% of those failed asylum seekers are still in Canada past that particular time frame. So given this failure, that these failed asylum seekers are still in Canada and haven't been removed or left on their own, how many of these failed asylum seekers have slipped through the cracks and the government has no idea where they're presently located?
Mr. Cloutier, can you offer some perspective on the removal process?
Thank you, Minister.
Well, we know what the removal process is. I just wondered if the government has any idea of where these people are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Generally speaking, we do everything that we can in order to effect the removals as quickly as possible, and that is our obligation under the law. There are a series of factors that would impede this, including our ability to obtain travel documents, confirmation of other factors, making arrangements with the countries.
Can you table the number that might be that you might not know where they are or slip through the cracks? I mean, we know the process and that sort of thing from this side. We just wanted to know if you've determined where all of these people are at the present time. If you can just table that information for us.
Mr. Chair, we will provide a document outlining our approach to this, indeed.
But can you give us a number as to how many you don't know where they are?
So, Mr. Chair, I understand the question that's being asked. I think in order to answer that question properly, we need to go back to the way the system of removals work. We have, at any given time, a removal inventory of about 15,000 people. Our priority is always to deal with national security concerns, to deal with people with serious criminality, and the second tier.
Mr. Chair. Again, to cite Bosch and O'Brien around the requirements of witnesses to answer questions, my colleague has asked a very specific question, which is, according to the department performance report, they have not met their targets for deportations, and he is asking how many people, I believe, the government is not aware of their whereabouts, and he is asking for that information to be tabled to committee. I would just ask that you remind the witness under this particular clause that he is required to submit this information to committee.
Mr. Chair, we're just working off of the government's own report.
Yes, and obviously witnesses are required to answer all questions that the committee puts to them. However, witnesses may object to the questions asked. Committee may decide to force an answer or not. It is not my opinion that the witness is not answering the question. What I've heard is that they will present a report in response to the question. At that time, I believe that the committee could decide whether or not the report has satisfied the request of the committee. So I would say that I would now move on. We're at over your time. We've balanced the same time as the Liberals had, so I now move to Ms. Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome, ministers, and to the officials, and thank you for your presentation. I'd like to just expand a little bit on the Safe Third Country Agreement. I know that the government's perspective and the minister's perspective is that we should keep the Safe Third Country Agreement in place. However, the minister must know that we have had a situation where a asylum seeker, Mr. Mohammed Sadi, who came through in the dead of winter, right? He crossed over, and in fact, he had advised that in the U.S. his claim was rejected. He cited immigration detention, the lack of access to legal counsel as major factors related to his claim and how his claim was being rejected in the U.S. He came to Canada. He lost digits in the dead of winter. He made an application and was successful. Canada, that is to say, found that he was a valid asylum seeker and granted him the status to stay. So that's one case that shows that the Safe Third Country Agreement is not working, at least not for Mr. Sadu. The other situation that has been brought to our attention from the IRB is that some 300 application has now been processed. A little over 50% of those 300 successfully got an asylum claim here in Canada. So I just would argue this, for the minister to look at this carefully and intensively, because Canada has a legal obligation in the international world to play our part with respect to asylum seekers. And frankly, many, many people, including experts, are saying that the Safe Third Country Agreement is not working. So I'm going to I'm going to park that with the minister. I'd like to just get a quick response from the ministers specifically related to Mr. Sadu's case. How can you then say that the Safe Third Country Agreement is working for people when in fact it didn't at least work for him?
The challenge of taking one case and applying it to an agreement as old as the Safe Third Country Agreement, which has many components, is I hope you can appreciate that. You're asking me to comment on a specific case with specific sets of circumstances and then applying it to a general agreement that has quite frankly been very, very good for Canada in terms of management of asylum seekers between Canada and the United States. On the larger point, you made a really good point about expertise and international law and so on. The expert body on domestic asylum systems of countries is the UNHCR, and they continue to.
Thank you.
If I can just finish.
Sorry, no, I'm going to interrupt.
If I can just finish my
I'm
answer.
actually going to interrupt because I understand the UNHCR argument, and the minister has actually advanced that argument in a lot of places. I have limited time.
It's not an argument; it's a fact.
I have limited time, and so I'm going to say this. We also have 300 cases that's come through. 50%, more than 50% of those have also been approved with their applications. So it's not one case, more than one case. I'm going to leave that. I do want to actually talk about the IRB and the importance of ensuring that the IRB's, the integrity of our system is protected. We actually have a situation when the minister was last here, a backlog with the IRB, and with an additional 1,000 cases being added to the backlog. We now have a situation where and that's 1,000 cases per month. We now have a situation where it is 1,400 per month, and there's been no additional resources given to the IRB. The minister himself, when he was last here, said that yes, efficiencies needs to be looked at, which is what the IRB is doing, but he also said that there needs to be additional resources, yet no additional resources being given to the IRB. Is the minister planning on giving the IRB additional resources to deal with this influx?
So you've asked a number of questions there. I'll try to answer as quickly as possible to take advantage of the time. Number one, the IRB is an independent arm's length adjudicatory body that makes its own decisions. However, we work closely with them to make sure that we work with them to become more efficient and so on. On the issue of resources, we've launched a third-party review to make sure that we can identify the best ways in which we can invest in the IRB. It's not just a question of money, it's also a question of reforms, it's a question of doing things better and faster and more efficient, and also more innovation in the processes of the IRB, and that takes a study to do that, and there's a third-party review going on now to identify those challenges and solutions that you're talking about.
Thank you. Is the minister looking at changing the structure of the IRB and how asylum claims are being processed?
The IRB third-party review will look at everything with respect to the IRB and they'll issue a report, and that report will
All right.
inform both
Thank
you
you.
and I on the way forward for the IRB.
Thank you. So the minister's comments talks about how he feels that everything is being managed well, and now this is not about the staff on the ground, I have to say, and what I'm getting back on the ground, both the CBSA staff, in fact, at every level, all of their staff are doing an exemplary job along with the community in a very trying situation. However, it is interesting to note, though, in response to the committee members' question, the IRCC indicates that they only began tracking irregular crossings in early April 2017. So as a result, claims made by those who entered since the start of 2017 cannot be reported on. So there's a gap. If the government had been monitoring this situation right from the get-go, and that is to say, anticipating what the implications would be from the Trump administration, there is a huge gap, right? Because the irregular crossings began prior to April 2017. So why didn't the government get on with it right from the beginning? And what about Manitoba? So resources is being provided to Quebec, which is fantastic, but what about Manitoba? I know that the province of Manitoba has asked for additional resources specifically related to resettlement services. BC is also faced with tremendous stresses from the NGO, to which they've spoken with the minister directly, and the minister has ignored that request, and nothing has happened with respect to that. So how can the minister say that you've managed this effectively?
I'll let my official, Mike McDonald, answer the first question with respect to the tracking of the asylum seekers.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of whether or not there is a gap, there is not a gap. First, it's important to say that how an asylum seeker comes to Canada from an immigration IRCC perspective in terms of looking at their claim is not important. Now, there is no gap prior to April back to January, because we, as a federal government, we can rely on the intercept data from the RCMP. What we have done since April 1st is we have combined all of our data sets in order to create a better picture overall, and one that is consistent and one that we can all work from. So we have combined various data sources since April 1st to create that national picture, but we have access to all the data for the year.
Thank you very
Well,
much. I'm afraid
that's not the
7.5
information that's been
minutes.
provided.
Monsieur Dubourg, on va continuer avec 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to begin, good morning to my colleagues, Mr. Goodale and Mr. Hussein, and welcome to your colleagues. My first question is for Minister Hussein. You said so in your opening statement. What's important to us is that we must protect Canadians, and we must properly assess claims of protection by asylum seekers, and we must apply due process to those. This past summer, there was a surge in migrants into Quebec. Some people alleged that the Canadian government was in a crisis. Please explain to us, based on the numbers of asylum seekers, whether it really was a crisis or was it an irregular situation which the government easily dealt with.
No doubt in my mind that the numbers we were looking at in the summer were unusual in the volume in terms of the daily arrivals. We went from a daily average of between 20 to 30, then it became 50, and then we went as high as 200 to 300 a day. But the important thing to note here is that there was planning. The presence, the satellite office of the RCMP at Lacolle, which I was able to visit, they had procured that facility before the influx, the increase in the influx. CBSA was able to quickly expand its operations and redeploy staff. I was able to see firsthand the professionalism and the humane way in which people were being processed. And there was absolutely no downgrading of our rigorous screening processes to make sure that each and every asylum seeker who was being processed in that facility was handled in a professional manner. In terms of IRCC, we quickly ramped up our capacity in Montreal from being able to have about 32 eligibility hearings a day to about 200 a day, and that is as a result of procuring more space, but also redeploying staff from other parts of Quebec, but also other parts of Canada, because we recognized that this was a pressure point, and we dealt with it accordingly. So, my impression of the whole situation is that it was an unusual influx. It was an increase that that was not similar to the previous volumes, but the fact that we were able to work very closely with Quebec and Ontario afterwards made sure that we were able to address any pressure points and increase the capacity within our own department and other departments to make sure that we respond to the situation in a professional manner. So it was not a crisis.
Merci. Donc vous venez de le dire.
Thank you. You've just said so. It was an unusual situation. The media covered the incidents. And you also said that at a certain point, 300 persons or more were crossing the border, and now we're down to 50 or so. I know that several measures were taken. I know that officials sprang into action here in Canada, and you also met with community leaders in Montreal. You also sent officials abroad. You went to the United States, but that did not receive as much media coverage as the two MPs which were sent to the States. Can you tell us a little more about your visit to New York City? Specifically, who did you meet? Did Global Affairs Canada also play a role in your visit to the States?
Canada facilitated the meeting, and we actually held it in the Canadian consulate in New York. It involved the largest legal services provider for immigrants all across New York State, and the largest settlement provider, the Catholic Community Services. And so between the two of them, they actually take phone calls from individuals all over the state of New York, asking questions about U.S. immigration policies, but also Canadian asylum policies. And so they field those calls and answer questions. But what struck me was that they themselves needed to be brought up to speed on some of the issues around Canadian asylum policies. So, for example, they thought that temporary protected status somehow meant that you had some sort of access to the Canadian asylum system if you have TPS status in the United States. So I corrected that. I was able to answer a lot of their questions. They didn't know that Canada actually removes people. So I had to educate them on that, and I said, yes, we remove people, and this is how it's done. I walked them through our asylum process, made sure that they understood what was at stake, and they were very happy because they said, well, now that we have this information, we can share it with the people who call us. And the consulate then gave them materials, promised to give them materials on our larger immigration system, because they felt that some of the people who call them could easily qualify under our legitimate economic immigration streams, and there was no use for them to essentially abuse the asylum system. So they were very happy to receive that information from us.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, mais le temps passe.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Time is running short, so I have a quick question for Mr. Goodale. We heard some people say, whether it was at Lacolle or Emerson, that we established official points of entry there. In your view, is that a good idea? Since we know that our border is over 9,000 kilometers long, Should we go so far as to build a wall to prevent irregular entries? What is your point of view on that and our Canadian values?
Obviously, Monsieur DeBoer, Canadians would not support the notion of building a wall. that is not consistent with the traditions or the values or the heritage of Canadians.
I'm afraid I need to cut you off there at 7.5 minutes.
There's much more.
There's much more. And hopefully the next time you get around. Mr. Motts, welcome to the committee, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the ministers and your officials for coming. Mr. Minister Goodale, it's our understanding that, and this is from frontline CBSA officers, who, by the way, are worried about talking to MPs for fear of losing their job, have indicated that the normal initial process in dealing with regular asylum seekers usually takes about 8 hours. This is the initial process. Mm-hmm. But these same CBSA officers are now saying that the processing time for illegal border crossing initially has dropped to 1.5 to 2 hours. So that drastic reduction in initial processing time leaves Canadians to wonder what is being cut out of the process to deal with these illegal border crossing. Can you provide an explanation as to what you are not doing now that you would normally do for the legal border crossers that you're not doing? What have you cut?
Mr. Chair, I have, through this whole process over the last number of months, constantly sought advice from CBSA about how to handle the volume that they have to deal with in a timely way and in a way that does not, in any manner, short-circuit the security issues that need to be dealt with. And I have been assured repeatedly by the CBSA that there is no compromise on security. They have internally reallocated resources in order to make sure they have the personnel with the right skill and talent at the various border points that need that attention. They work seamlessly with the RCMP, and the RCMP have also reallocated resources into the areas that are most affected. CBSA, the RCMP, and the government have been absolutely vigilant to ensure that the security process was not compromised. And by the way, let me just say about if you're hearing a CBSA officer that says he's somehow reluctant to speak to a member of Parliament, he or she need not have any such reluctance. They are citizens of this country, and they're entitled to speak to their members of Parliament.
So basically, what I'm hearing is that some processes have been cut, and that the priority remains the security of Canadians to bring people in. So processes have been cut. Could you please provide in writing, or the CBSA department, to this committee at your earliest convenience, what processes actually have been cut, and we can move on.
I can provide. Your question implies some degradation of services.
No,
that implication is just not appropriate. I will provide a description of how we have coped with the volume in a way that processes that volume efficiently and does not compromise on safety and security. And any implication to the contrary is simply inaccurate.
So, and then with that explanation, the difference between how illegal border crosses are being processed now compared to the regular ones that were done before would be a good comparison. Thank you. So it's our understanding that in the shortened process, what's happening now is people who cross the border illegally are conducted only with a basic criminal history check, criminal records check, and fingerprinted. After that, they are told they can go, and the meeting is adjourned to a secondary meeting at some point. The asylum seeker is asked to come back for a secondary meeting. These CBSA officers we spoke to are telling us that some of these asylum seekers, as we said, are not showing up for the secondary hearings. So if that's the case, how do we know where they are, who they are, and what's happening with that whole process, and how many are not attending these particular hearings? Do we have any numbers on that?
In the secondary hearing, I presume you're referring to is the IRCC interview,
Yeah, the follow-up.
that determines whether or not they are then eligible to go before the IRB.
Can you, and I just, given the limited time, Mr. Minister, I apologize. Can you just table those numbers for us? That would be great. So my last question would be, so how does the government propose to deal with this serious issue of people not coming back for their secondary interviews? And what's their plan to restore public confidence in our ability to secure our border, to make sure that and mitigate the concerns for public safety for those that come in through a process that is illegal and don't follow the process as they should?
We have 17 seconds.
Mr. Chair, we will examine all of these questions very carefully to make sure that we provide every bit of information we possibly can in response to the inquiries from various members of Parliament. But let me just say, the implication in this dump of innuendos that somehow the border is insecure and somehow the safety of the country is being compromised is absolutely wrong.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Tabera, we have about 4 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the ministers and department staff for being here today. My question is we just heard from the other side that processes haven't been cut. I just want to talk about some of the false information and to see if some of these processes have been cut. So I want to talk about Minister Sen. You mentioned preferential treatment. In your statement, you said that that there's false information about preferential treatment between asylum seekers and refugee claimants. These are completely separate application streams that I'm aware of. Can you please elaborate on that?
Thank you. That's a really important question. It deals with the implication that somehow the asylum claimants coming in are impacting or degrading our ability to meet our targets with respect to the other streams of immigration, whether it is family class, economic immigration, and the overseas resettled refugees. And nothing could be further from the truth in the sense that asylum claimants are processed and then they go before the IRB. So it's a different stream altogether, whereas the rest of the immigration system are people who are processed and selected and approved by the IRCC. So it's 2 different streams, and therefore, and even in our ability to do so. So the suggestion that somehow an asylum claimant is taking the spot of an overseas resettled refugee is simply not supported by the facts.
Clarifying that. My second question can be both to Minister Sen or Minister Goodale. The ad hoc intergovernmental task force on irregular migration been playing with regards to collaboration between the federal and provincial governments to address irregular crossings. Can you elaborate on what the ad hoc intergovernmental task force has been cooperating with?
It's been an effort to make sure that all of the federal agencies and all of the provincial agencies that are directly engaged in dealing with crossing issues are working effectively together. And it's been an unprecedented but very good exercise. The provincial ministers are at the table with the federal ministers. They constantly review and update the most recent information. They identify where the pressure points might be that need special attention, and they work collaboratively with each other to make sure the solutions are deployed. It's been a very good process, and it's one that may be replicated in other areas of federal, provincial, territorial circumstances that involve different agencies and different levels of government together. It's very useful. Emma?
Yeah, so I will use an example of what we've been able to do together to give you a sense of how useful the ad hoc committee task force has been. So the government of Quebec approached us with a concern for the potential impact that the numbers of asylum seekers could potentially have on their social assistance program. And they asked us to assist them in the expediting of work permits for all asylum seekers so that these people can support themselves while they wait for their IRB hearings. And we were able to, because they identified that pressure point, we were able to then bring that concern back to our department, and IRCC has been able to quickly move to address that pressure point and expedite the processing for work permits for all asylum seekers so that we minimize the impact that they have on provincial social assistance programs. So that's an example, a concrete way, an example of how the task force has been able to identify pressure points and work together to solve them collectively.
Thank you, ministers, and thank you, Mr. Tabara. That draws a close to our time with you. Just Chair's prerogative, I want to take 1 minute to thank the officials and to thank the ministers for not only your time but for your work on this. Last week, I had the opportunity to go to Manitoba, and I met with 11 of the asylum seekers who had crossed the border at Emerson, including the one that Ms. Kwan mentioned today. And overwhelmingly, I was extremely proud to be a Canadian. I asked their story about the border crossing and the respect that the RCMP had offered to them, including making sure that they were medically treated. They had food to eat. One offered a coat on a very cold day in January. CBSA, they told me the story, and it was very overwhelmingly positive as a Canadian about the respect they were afforded, also the due process that they were given, as well as with IRCC. Of course, 2 of them have had their hearings already with the IRB, and were successfully determined to be in need of protection in Canada, and 9 are waiting with postponed hearings. So we will come back to you to keep pushing you on the IRB and having resources. But your forces and your officials, I was overwhelmingly proud, not as an MP, as a Canadian, for the work you're doing. So thank you, and we're going to take a suspension in the meeting as we change witnesses. Committee members, let's regather.
Mr. Chair, I have a point of order that I'd like to raise.
I don't have quorum yet.
You do. They don't have to be at the table as long as they're in the room. Yeah.
Committee members, could I have you please take your seats? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I raise this as a point of order, as we just heard from IRCC officials to a question that I asked, particularly related to irregular crossings being tracked by IRCC. In our written response that was provided to us, it states that irregular crossings only began being tracked in IRCC systems in early April 2017. As a result, claims made by those who entered since the start of 2019 cannot be reported on. I asked this question about the information that needed to be provided to us from last year, right? It's because the irregular crossings began in the dead of winter, and that information in response to this question to a committee member was not provided, and to say that they did not have the information. We just heard, when I asked that question to the minister, whom he deferred it to his official, respond to say that they had that information. Then my question is, how is it possible that we would have a written answer that's contradictory? We're not getting accurate information before us, and that to me is extremely troubling, Mr. Chair. And so I raise this and bring this to your attention. I hope that we don't have to go through these kinds of documents with inaccurate information before us, and I would ask that you follow up with the official with regards to this.
One moment. I think the committee has the right to have information that is requested accurately. However, the witnesses also have the right to present their information that they want to present. Our job is then to evaluate both of them, and the committee can request additional information. So if you're requesting additional information or an explanation, I think that's fair. We can simply do that. So I would rule that your point of order is okay, and that we will ask for a clarification of the discrepancies that you think are there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
But that's not going to be debated. I've ruled on it. Okay. Witnesses, thank you very much for joining us today, and we recognize that the bulk of the work on this briefing has come from IRCC and public safety. However, there has been a more wide, not quite whole of government, but a larger approach to this issue. And so thank you for joining us today to offer thoughts both from Global Affairs as well as from the Department of National Defense. We welcome Mr. Cronin and General Bourgon. Merci. And who would like to begin? Mr. Cronin.
Certainly. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Niall Cronin, and I'm the Director of the Division at Global Affairs Canada, responsible for coordinating advocacy and engagement on behalf of the Government of Canada in the U.S. and Mexico. We've been working closely with IRCC, CBSA, provinces, and others since the summer on the issue that we will discuss today. At the request of IRCC, and in order to provide correct information and gather on-the-ground insights, Canada's Embassy in Washington and our network of 12 consuls general in the United States are presently engaged in outreach on this issue. Our focus has been to detect and correct inaccurate information with respect to Canada's asylum process that has been circulating in some communities in the United States. Specifically, our Embassy and Consuls General have worked to build connections with local representatives, local media, and community organizations in the United States who can help correct any misinformation which may be circulating about Canada's immigration processes. We are also working to gather information and insight from representatives and community organizations about any potential movements or patterns of migration. And finally, we are supporting outreach by members of Parliament and ministers, including Minister Hussein, MP Rodriguez, and MP Dubourg. Since Labor Day, our representatives have engaged close to 25 U.S. decision makers, including members of Congress, governors, lieutenant governors, and have met with numerous diplomatic representatives, NGOs, community leaders, municipal, county, and state-level officials in communities across the United States. This information is collected and reported back to IRCC. I should also note that the in-person outreach in the United States is supported by way of digital engagement. The embassies and consul generals' social media accounts are sharing Government of Canada messaging in English, French, Spanish, and Creole in order to correct misinformation about Canada's immigration system. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee, and I look forward to answering the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin. General.
Monsieur Chairman, membres du comité.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. I'm Brigadier General Lise Bourgon, Director General of Operations for the Strategic Joint Staff of the Canadian Armed Forces.
Contribution to a whole-of-government response to the influx of asylum seekers crossing into Quebec from the U.S. At the height of the crisis, the Canadian Armed Forces were tasked with providing temporary accommodation and making them available to our federal and civilian partners for their use. As a result, the Canadian Armed Forces build tentage for up to 1,200 personnel in Lacolle, Quebec, and 500 personnel at the NAV Canada Centre in Cornwall. CAF also prepared our cadet camp in Valcartier, Trenton, and Gagetown in case interim lodging capacity in Quebec could not handle the demand. Throughout this operation, CAF was a supporting role to CBSA and IRCC, with the Government of Canada Public Safety Operations Centre as the overall coordination organizations. So those are all the words for me today. So I thank you for the appearance, and I'll answer any questions.
Merci beaucoup. On va commencer avec Monsieur Tabera.
Thank you. We'll begin with Mr. Tabera.
For appearing to us today, to the committee. My first question is for both of you. Feel free, whoever would like to respond. In response in the preparation for the influx of asylum seekers crossing the border, Canada is developing the Asylum Seeker Influx National Strategy, or National Strategic Response Plan. As part of the contingency planning, can you give us an update on how this planning is going and what kind of best practices are being incorporated?
I think from the perspective of global affairs, my apologies, it's probably a question that's better answered by IRCC and folks who are working more directly on it. What we're focused on is really trying to get the right information out to communities in the United States to avoid kind of things that happened over the summer.
That's if you can elaborate on some of the things that you have been doing in the United States to address the misinformation that maybe some of the people, individuals there have been receiving.
Sure. So, for example, Minister Hussein talked a little bit about his trip to New York. So events like that are being replicated across the United States. Our Consul General in Minneapolis met with a number of representatives, both in Minneapolis and North Dakota, again, who have connections into various communities, really to answer their questions about the immigration process and how it's done, how it should be done properly. And really the goal there is so they can pass that information on to people who are coming to them.
Thank you. And if you can maybe tell the committee of how maybe global affairs and maybe the national defense, how they've been working with the provinces as well with other institutions to help the asylum seekers that are coming over, and what additional resources have been provided.
If I understand correctly, so resources that have been provided at the provincial level?
Yes, at the provincial level, and how you've been working with the provinces.
again, on resources to sort of handle the influx, it's probably a question that IRCC folks, they're more in touch with folks. But from Global Affairs, we've certainly been working with the provinces, keeping them updated on what we're doing in the U.S. to get the right information out. So, for example, every 2 weeks, we have calls with provincial representatives, where we talk about kind of what our consuls generals are doing in the United States, what they're hearing, and just to keep the provinces up to date.
Okay. And next question is Ms. Bourgeon, sorry if I pronounce it incorrectly. In terms of the Department of National Defense, what are some of the resources that they've been providing at the borders?
The request for us was purely from a logistical and accommodation. So so we provided, like I said, about tentages in La Colle for 1,200 personnel, and then at the NAV Canada also about tents for about 500. Over the numbers of personnel allocated from CAF fluctuated. At the highlight, as we were setting up the camps, we had up to 116 CAF members building the tent in La Colle, and about 130 at the NAV Canada Centre. As we were building the tent city, if I can call it, the interim lodging site. But a day-to-day was about 25 CAF that were doing the maintenance of those tents on a daily. If I can answer your question about the contingency, the CAF role, we're in supporting role, but the Government Up Center has asked CAF if we could provide some planning capability. The Canadian Armed Forces are really good. We're really good planners, so we loan to the Up Center 2 CAF members to provide some support for planning activities for the contingency.
How much more minutes? 2.5. Okay. And is there some coordination between the Department of National Defense coordinating with the United States, and if there is, what type of coordination has there been across the border too?
There's not been any coordination. Again, CAF role was solely in supporting for logistic, and so we have not done any coordination. That was done with the other governments.
Okay, and if you can tell us for the support that you've given to these asylum seekers at its peak, how many were you assisting, and then and how much has it gone down to now, and like how many have been assisted, and how many have been I'm not formulating my question correctly here. How many have been assisted, and is that progression have been moving forward, and have people been assisted and then processed in the proper terms, proper streams?
Again, the CAF involvement, we didn't have any direct contact with the refugees. That was CBSA and IRCC. So our role was solely to assist CBSA and IRCC with the proper accommodation and the proper resources on the ground. So we built tents. We also provided soldiers to help the Red Cross, because the Red Cross was responsible for the provision of the daily humanitarian services. So CAF soldiers helped with the food distribution, but we didn't have any role into the processing or the handling of the refugees.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Rampel.
Thank you. Earlier this week, we heard the figure for Mexican visa or asylum claimants made by Mexican nationals had already reached over the 900 mark, which is a significant amount when you compare it to, let's say, 2015 or even 2016 numbers prior to the visa lift being put in place. I'm just wondering if Global Affairs has reached out to either the Mexican embassy or the Mexican government to ask them to put in place any sort of processes to stop this trend from increasing, and if so, what those measures that were requested were.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know the answer, but I'm happy to go back and check both with colleagues at headquarters and also the embassy in Mexico City to see where that stands.
And you'll table that with committee?
Yeah.
Thank you. We've also heard that internal briefings to the government have shown that there are over 300,000 people in the United States that may have their TPS status revoked in the next year. I'm just wondering how many global affairs, if there's been any analysis in terms of how many of those are likely to seek asylum in Canada through illegal or unofficial points of entry, and if that has started to be accounted for in next year's immigration level plans.
See, I don't know the answer to the second part of the question, but certainly the first part, those are the reason we're sending folks out to talk to the communities, to hear what they're saying and kind of what community leaders are hearing from their own communities. Are people thinking about Canada as they're factoring in decisions about their future? I mean, from the reporting I've seen, it's mixed. Some places Canada is entering the conversation, and that came out in some of the conversations in Los Angeles. But other places, folks have just said, well, thank you so much for the information. If we hear anything kind of brewing, we'll certainly let you know, which was kind of the point of the outreach, was to build a relationship that maybe hadn't existed before.
So really there's no sort of projection in terms of how many people or volumes that might occur, let's say, in the next 12 months?
Out of the population,
Yes.
that, no.
Okay, thank you. I'm also, we've heard reports of, there was a story where Nigerian asylum seekers who entered Canada through illegal border crossing said that they had heard, quote, about this pipeline that would get them to our borders. I'm just wondering what diplomatic efforts with our allies in the region have been ongoing in attempting to dispel the notion of a pipeline to access Canada illegally.
Yeah, and that's a big part of both kind of that's a big part of the outreach in the United States, is really sort of both reaching out to communities directly, and then also, so when Minister Hussein was talking about his meetings in New York, the groups he were meeting with had links into various communities, so it was broader than just one group, and that the point of that is exactly to dispel the myth that there is this pipeline or some sort of free pass into Canada.
Have any border security issues been brought up with the Americans or the Mexicans, for that, Frank, as part of the NAFTA discussions?
That's a fair question. I don't know. I'm not involved in the NAFTA negotiations.
Okay, that would be interesting to know, because the minister did say that the Safe Third Country Agreement hasn't been brought up to date, and we're just wondering why. I'm just wondering, in either of your departments, has there been any analysis on the potential effect of Bill C-59 in terms of the ability to share information between either of your departments with either CBSA or IRCC or even the IRB in terms of people who have sought asylum claim or asylum protection or have received it, in identifying them as potential public safety risks?
Sorry, it was Bill C-59?
That's correct.
I can go back and check, but again, because Global Affairs wouldn't be dealing directly with these people, there may not be, but I'll check.
Yes.
And it's the same thing for CAF. We're not responsible. That would be a CBSA or CMP CSIS. So.
Okay, great, thank you. And with that, I'll turn the microphone over to Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, and I just thank you for the work that you're doing in regards to this whole situation. Mr. Cronin, you mentioned that that you deal with a lot of social media. You're looking at all of the, trying to provide clarity for a number of the statements that have been made, that sort of thing. I'm just wondering if the Prime Minister's tweet in particular, the tweet where he said, quote, "Those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength. Hashtag welcome to Canada." I'm just wondering if that statement has caused any confusion in the States, because we have seen media reports where people coming into Canada have actually used that as a statement that, well, this is why we're seeking asylum in Canada. We're welcome here. Can you just see if that, have you had to clarify any of those, of anything around that statement before?
In the reports I've read on outreach and the various meetings that have taken place by the embassy and our consuls general, that specific tweet has not come up. It's more kind of presenting general information about Canada's immigration system and asylum processes.
Yeah, it has come up in media, though, reports when people have been interviewed, asylum seekers in Canada that have come in have been, it's been one of the things that has been brought up and mentioned by them. And do you think it's caused any confusion amongst any of those people who are seeking it? Do they understand clearly what was meant?
Well, again, I go back to kind of what I've read of the reports from the outreach and the meetings that have taken place, and really it's more about passing on the correct information, and where the misinformation is coming from, I can't speak to.
We have a lot of, you've indicated, our consulate across the country are working on this, teams in Washington, New York. Would it help if the Prime Minister would tweet out something like, asylum seekers should not seek refuge by crossing illegally into Canada?
I think the messages that have come from ministers, and we heard it in Minister Goodale's and Minister Hussein's opening statement, have been quite clear, and we've been using those messages in our outreach in the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Cronin. Thank you, Mr. Maguire. Ms. Kwan?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for their presentation. I'd like to just ask Mr. Cronin, in the work that you're doing in reaching out to the various different groups in the United States, have you heard from people who've cited their concern with the fact that the U.S. for them is no longer a safe country for them for a whole variety of reasons?
I'm not sure I would characterize it that way. I think what our people have heard is that there's a lot of uncertainty, and it's more that what people have heard in the communities is that Canada is like an open door, and that's what we've been really trying to stress in the meetings, is that there is, like, Canada is a welcoming country, but that there is a process that needs to be followed. And so when Minister Hussein was talking about his time in New York, and that folks were surprised that we even remove people from Canada, or that somehow we have a special program for those that have TPS status in the U.S., those are the things we're trying to correct.
So in that process, so nobody indicated, for example, the threat in which they feel with the height of anti-immigrant, anti-refugee rhetoric that's going on in the United States, with the Trump administration's direction, first with the travel ban, and now really with his general overall indication that the immigrant community or refugee community are simply not very welcome in the United States. So none of those issues surfaced in this discussion with any of the persons that you were in touch with.
I think what people are more focused on is really, like, it's a fair question and a fair point. The uncertainty that exists in the United States, and what our people have tried to do is really focus on how do we give them the correct information so that they can pass that along to their communities, so their communities are better informed. And if that gives sort of, a measure of sort of security or knowledge, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, it's interesting because Amnesty International did a informal study, if you will, with people who crossed over, and in their findings with the people with their interviews indicated that people were in fact very concerned about their safety and that of their children, and the heightened level of discrimination that they faced, and that fear has propelled them, to make that crossing. People don't do these crossings because it's a fun thing to do. They're risking life and limb to get here, and some of them are bringing children along as well. And so the risks are grave, and especially this occurred in the dead of winter. And of course, even in the summer, this is an issue as well. When I visited Manitoba, for example, the heat is unbelievable. And so you have both aspects of it, the cold and the heat, that could be very detrimental to you. In any event, I'm going to leave that for now. In terms of the work of the military, and thank you for the information, in terms of the military, could you provide for us the amount of the resources in dollar terms that was provided to assist in this process. So it sounded to me like it's mostly staff or military personnel who help provide and set up the infrastructure to help temporarily house the influx of the asylum seekers. Do you have a figure that you can provide with us?
Indeed, the provision was more in labor, so soldiers setting up tents, loaning of the tents that we had in our system. So there's no dollar, the only dollar value is the manpower. The operation is still ongoing, so I can't give you a final tally of how much element it will cost. We're looking at a very rough estimate right now. We can give you the official figures later on when the operation is done, but we're looking about $500,000. So, but this is a very rough estimate, and because the work is still ongoing for taking up some of the tents, because as it is right now in Lacolle, there is a capacity in Lacolle for 500 personnel in the tent, and we are not going to take those tents down until there is a winterized solution available in Lacolle. So we're estimating that about mid-November, all the tents will be down.
Thank you very much, and I would appreciate if you could provide that information to the committee once it's available, and to break it down so that we actually have a sense of, where the line items are in terms of that expenditure. And am I assuming correctly that expenditure then is coming out of, well, maybe you can tell me, which budget do you anticipate that this expenditure will come out of?
Well, again, that's not something that I will decide. That's the DM decision that will make those decisions.
Okay, and perhaps when that final figure is provided, perhaps the DM can provide you with that information on what expenditure, what line item would this expenditure be coming out of. My other question is, in terms of your involvement, has it only just been to the call situation, or have you been called in to provide supports in other arenas as well? So I'm wondering whether or not there's been any involvement with Emerson, for example.
No, the only we provided the infrastructure in Lacolle, and at the NAV Canada in Cornwall also we set up further tents to accommodate as an interim lodging solution. So for the Canadian Armed Forces support on the asylum seekers have been concentrated into Lacolle and NAV Canada. We also had, like I said, our three cadet camps in Valcartier, in Trenton, and in Gagetown that we had on standby, that we prepped in case there was a requirement for excess capacity that the province of Quebec, the interim lodging, could not support in Montreal. We were standing by in those three cadet camps because, of course, the summer season and the cadets courses were finished, so we had those three camps that we could have provided for excess capacity. Each of the camps had about 500 personnel that they could accommodate on the interim lodging.
And each of the tents that were set up, how many people can it contain?
That's a very good question. I would need to go back, but it's probably around 15 to 20% would be my assumption, but I'll get back to the actual figure.
Okay. And then I guess...
I'm afraid that's the end of your time. Thank you. Monsieur Dubourg.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Thank you very much. I would like to say good morning to Mr. Cronin, Ms. Bourgon. Thank you for being here to answer our questions. I'll begin with you, Mr. Cronin. You said that the Prime Minister's tweet... In fact, we didn't really talk about it yet in relation to asylum seekers, but it's clear that the Prime Minister said that Canada is an open and welcoming country, and that if people are fleeing persecution or fear for their lives, that Canada is open to welcome them because it's part of our values. And we do have to speak openly about these things. We've noted that over the last 10 years, or before 2015, and I don't know how long you've been at Global Affairs Canada, but I believe that Canada's image has changed. These outreach efforts you've conducted to clarify information on for asylum seekers, This is not something you normally did in the past. Am I right to say that this is something new for the department?
New for global affairs in the United States. And that's why we've been grateful for the support that's been shown from IRCC and CBSA, who've been able to provide us with information about the immigration process and the asylum process so we can pass that along to communities in the United States.
Remercier pour tous les efforts que vous avez fait.
Thank you for all of the work you've done so far to build up those missions and for welcoming me when I was in the States. You've also been in touch with leaders of the community, and as a result, we've seen that the stream of asylum seekers fell to a trickle after we did our outreach activities. So after speaking to people in Miami and LA and elsewhere, after taking up contact with people there, is it important for you to keep in touch with them, to keep lines of communication open?
I think that the benefit of the outreach is establishing relationships with these communities so that should something happen, should the situation change, they know where they can come to for correct information.
D'accord. Il y a une information qui a...
Now, there's some information that was out in the States and also appeared in the Miami Herald. I don't remember exactly when it was in September, but it said that in a church basement in New York City, and this was false information that was going around, that there was going to be an official in this church basement, and this church official would tell members of the diaspora how to enter Canada. When you hear that kind of misinformation, and following visits by the minister or MPs down to the States, what do you do when you hear that kind of thing is actually going on?
The first things we would do is have our office that's located in the region reach out to that outlet to correct the story. And then we've also been using social media channels, outreach to local media, outreach to community media, again, to correct that misinformation. And we would address it directly.
Une dernière question pour M. Cronin, c'est que, étant donné votre...
Final question for Mr. Cronin. Given your position, you are in contact with various countries and partners. I would like to hear you when you exchange best practices with other countries. Take, for instance, in Europe, Italy, over the last year, received 123,000 asylum claims, and this year it's over 60,000, compared to the 13,000 people who have crossed the border into Quebec. Can you tell us what you have learned from other countries dealing with similar situations?
That's a fair question, but I would really go back to kind of what our remit and mandate has been, and we've focused ourselves on making sure that communities in the United States have the correct information. So we will. I mean, it's actually a point that's worthy of follow-up in terms of what could we learn from other examples where people have had to correct such misinformation. But we do think our process of connecting with those who are serving communities in the U.S., those that are representing communities in the U.S., is a benefit and is one that we will continue to pursue.
Merci. Madame Bourgon, vous...
Ms. Bourgon, in your role, are you doing any special planning for the coming winter? Will your tents stay up? How are you anticipating what will happen when the temperature turns cold? Well, of course, winter is a consideration we've taken into account from the outset. We knew that the tents were a short-term solution because in Canada and Quebec, spending the end of October In fact, Canadian forces engage in exercises all year, but they have the equipment, warm sleeping bags, etc. So we know that we had to think of a long-term solution, which would include winter. Since the Canadian forces were called in at the peak of the emergency, it ultimately is the responsibility of Public Safety Canada to find a winter solution. What we provided was a short-term solution to give other federal agencies an opportunity to start planning for the winter. And this is, in fact, what is happening now. There have been purchases of trailers. And this is an acceptable solution to house asylum seekers in winter. Thank you to both of you. We'll now go back to Mr. McGuire.
Take the lead right now, and I'll share that time with her.
Great, thank you. Just to follow up on that line of question that you just asked, what's the total cost been to date on the trailers?
That is not a CAF responsibility for the trailer. You would have to ask Public Safety or IRCC. I'm not sure which of the government is.
So what has CAF's involvement been in that, just to clarify for committee, the whole trailer initiative?
We didn't have anything to do with the trailer initiative. We only did the provision of the tentage at the height of the emergency. They needed the solution right away, and CAF was asked to provide that temporary solution in the form of tents.
So, and is that being wrapped up right now, or?
No, actually, well, the one in NAV Canada in Cornwall is being dismantled as we speak. The one in La Colle, we've dismantled the site one, I believe, to make space for the arrival of the trailers. But there's another site that's still there for 500 person accommodation, and we're waiting for the winterized solution to be provided so that we can dismantle the rest of the tents from.
And has CAF been directed toward any other activities or planning for the winter months beyond what you've already stated?
The planning for the winter months is being done by Public Safety.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your information as well, Mr. Cronin here again. Pardon me. You indicated in your presentation that there's, Canada's asylum process is being circulating in some communities. There's been misinformation, that sort of thing. And we know that MPs have gone to, I believe it's LA and Miami, have their, and Mr. Rodriguez, I understand, and as you mentioned, Minister Sen, have been there. Are there other ministers or members of MPs that have gone to the States, and do you know how many?
In terms of MPs, I believe it was MP Dubois to Miami, MP Rodriguez to Los Angeles, and then Minister Hussein was in New York. And I don't know of plans for further. But Global Affairs is ready to accommodate the travel down south for sure.
Yes, thank you. And my colleague, Mr. DeBerge, was asking questions earlier in regards to some of those areas. I appreciate that. Has there been, there's a number of cities then as well. Can you just tell me which ones and how many approximately other communities have been, that the groups have been into?
Sure. So we have 12 consuls general across the United States. Atlanta, Denver, Detroit, Chicago, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, New York, Miami, Dallas, Boston, San Francisco, and Seattle. And so those are actually where the physical offices are present, but then our consuls general travel around. So for example, our consul general in Minneapolis is obviously taking meetings in that city, but then also traveling to North Dakota, things like that.
Yes, I met them many times in our area. I'm from Manitoba, and so we have looked at that. And what sort of targeting have they done in Minneapolis? That was a seemed like if I could use the word hotbed, of where the ones originate coming into Manitoba. We've had just under 900 in Manitoba, and it's been a burden for Manitoba. There's been I believe that the little town of Emerson only got $30,000 in regards to payment, and Ms. Kwan was there, and I know that's the value that the minister announced when he was there last spring. But when I was there talking to the people in the community, they're very, very concerned that this is just a drop in the bucket to what it's cost them. And I'm just wondering if there's any further follow-up on that.
So in terms of outreach done specifically in Minneapolis, our Consul General's met with the Minnesota Commissioner for Public Safety. He's also met with the governor. I believe he's met with the lieutenant governor in Minnesota, but I can confirm that. And he's also met with some of the state representatives, and particularly there's a state representative in Minnesota from the Somali American community. And so really this was a useful opportunity, one, to start that, sort of build that link to see what is she hearing from the Somali American community in Minnesota.
And a final one, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, you also mentioned that you're doing a lot of work, Canada, with staying in touch with U.S. and Mexico. What do you expect out of Mexico in regards to Mexicans that may be in the United States?
I can only give you about 10 seconds. We're a little over time now, but if you'd like to just respond very quickly, I'll let you do that.
Sure, and sorry, I should have clarified. So the division where I work is responsible for advocacy and outreach, both in the U.S. and Mexico. Really, the focus on the asylum seekers and correcting the information, that's taking place in the U.S.
That was my question. It's Mexicans illegally in the U.S. What are they?
I do need to cut you off there. I would.
No, but it's a fair question. And so what we've actually asked our consuls general to do is reach out to like Mexican diplomatic representatives in the United States who have quite close ties to the Mexican American community, again, to pass them the information. And we're hearing the same things that the minister was hearing, that people just don't know about our system. And so it's really kind of an education process.
I understand that the Liberal side doesn't have more questions. They're satisfied with the answers. Any other questions from the opposition? I'm happy to give you a few more minutes. You're okay? Ms. Kwan?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a few other questions. In terms of the work that you're doing, Mr. Cronin, I'm also wondering, has the issue emerged as a concern with respect to human smuggling, in this context? Because we've been hearing some stories about that, and I wonder whether or not that serves as an issue.
Yes, in the discussions with some of the officials, certainly in Minnesota, what the sort of how the conversation is going is both sort of to your earlier point, but just about the risks that are involved in crossing illegally, and then also the potential for criminal involvement. And so that's one thing that we're watching.
Well, can you share with us what you were able to learn in this process, and what action is being undertaken by the government with respect to that?
In sort of to answer the first part of your question, really the reports I've read back, it's really being raised as a concern. They haven't gone into more detail than that. In terms of actions that the government is taking, it's probably a question that's better answered by kind of like CBSA and our intelligence services.
I see. So, okay. And in terms of ongoing monitoring with respect to this, what would that look like? Are you sort of just... maybe you can explain to us what that would look like?
Sure. So really, it's basically what we've asked our embassy and consuls general to do is to identify those organizations or influential people in their region who have connections into this community, make contact with them, and maintain those conversations on a regular basis. And they're reporting back to us on kind of how those are going, what they're learning, and we're passing that on to IRCC. And that's being complemented by, I think it was Minister Hussein or one of the officials from IRCC had mentioned that they're looking at more media monitoring, especially Spanish language media in the U.S. So we're pulling all that together.
I'm wondering if it's possible for for your department, I guess, to undertake to provide information back to this committee, specifically with respect to issues that have surfaced around human smuggling, and what information that could be shared with us, and so that the committee can be aware of it, and then also can take that into consideration with respect to this study that we are working on right now.
I can take that back for sure.
Thank you very much.
20 seconds.
Quick last question. So aside on the infrastructure, aside from the staffing and the tents, in terms of the information that's been provided, if there are any additional resources being provided that has not been spoken about today, I wonder if that could also be provided in the information that will be brought back to our committee.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. And I think that does draw our questioning to a close. Thank you very much for your time with us, as well as your testimony, which was very helpful for the committee. That draws to a close our briefing period on the irregular border crossings. I just want to remind the committee that after the constituency week, we have our expedited process on M39 on the Atlantic study, so that we have 8 hours of meeting that week, just to remind you that we have 2 special or unusual or irregular meetings. Illegal meetings happening that week, and our hope is to have 7 hours of witness testimony to complete that, and then the 8th hour of that week will be on instructions for the analyst. I'm just asking the committee to get as rigorous with our instructions to help our analysts with the report as possible. So on your constituency week, you might want to be thinking already. There is a summary of evidence that has been provided by the analysts, and then we can be as expeditious as possible getting that done. I think, seeing no other business, we'll adjourn the meeting.